What's going on, everyone? This is Kevin here, and this is the Samsung Galaxy A13 5G. And in this video, we're going to be going over the top 5 best and top 5 worst things about this phone. So join me as we cover a variety of different pros and cons related to the device. Now, the worst things about the phone are a little bit nitpicky because overall, I do think this is a good device. But they are things that I do want to point out here so that there aren't any surprises if you end up getting the phone. Now first, let's go over the top 5 best things about the A13 5G. Now the first thing about this phone that's impressive is the very large battery. So with this device, we're getting a 5,000 milliamp hour internal battery. So a very large battery that will definitely give you at least a day of usage, if not 2 days. And in addition to that, this phone does support 15-watt fast charging, so you will be able to replenish that battery pretty quickly. Now, another advantage of having such a large battery with a device like this one is that as time goes on, battery degradation will not be nearly as noticeable compared to other devices that have a small battery to begin with. So, battery degradation happens to every phone, and it happens over a period of time. So, if you're already starting out with a very large battery, then you're not going to notice a degrading battery quite as much compared to a phone that has a very small battery, like an iPhone, for example. So in general, I think Samsung made a great decision giving this phone a 5,000 milliamp hour internal battery. Now moving on to number 2, and that is the 3.5 millimeter headphone jack. Now having an actual headphone jack on a smartphone is becoming harder and harder to find. But in my opinion, there really are no downsides with having it. Of course, you can still pair up Bluetooth headphones because the phone has Bluetooth, but if you happen to have a pair of traditional headphones laying around, then you can certainly plug into the A13 5G and use them. Now, Apple was one of the first companies to get rid of the headphone jack, but at this point, many of the other competitors to Apple, such as even Samsung with their higher-end phones, have removed that feature. So I'm glad at least with the A13 5G, we still do have an actual headphone jack. Now the third best thing about the Galaxy A13 5G is the fingerprint sensor. Now it's not quite the best fingerprint sensor that I've ever used, but I am glad that we do have it, and I'm also glad that it's where the power button is located. So having it here is very convenient. You can easily access it and get into your device here. And to make things even better, this phone also supports facial recognition. So you have multiple methods for accessing your device. So I'm certainly glad that we have a lot of different options here. Let's give the fingerprint sensor one more try so that you can see how it works. And there you go. So pretty convenient. Now my fourth favorite thing about the Samsung Galaxy A13 5G is the processor that we're getting here with the phone. Now this phone does have a MediaTek processor, but MediaTek has come a long way in a relatively short period of time. And the processor that we're getting here is the MediaTek Dimensity 700 5G. Now, as the name does imply, the processor and of course the phone itself does support 5G connectivity. So as time goes on, that's going to be more and more important because 5G is the future when it comes to smartphones. Now, maybe in the future beyond that, we'll have 6G, and who knows what will come after that. But one thing's for sure, if this phone only had 4G, then you're missing out on some of the latest networking technology. But the benefits of the MediaTek Dimensity 700 5G processor are even better than just having 5G. The actual processor itself is decently powerful, especially for a phone in this segment. So I did run a Geekbench 5 benchmark test with the device, and I'll show you the score from that test right now. But essentially, I got a single core score of 466 and a multi-core score of 1113. Now compared to the predecessor to this device, the Galaxy A12, this phone is much more powerful, which is really good to see. Now what I recommend doing is running this test on your current phone and then compare your scores to these scores to get a better idea of whether or not the Galaxy A13 5G is going to be a performance upgrade for you. But I will say, again, for a lower-end Samsung device, the performance with this device is really impressive. Now, of course, compared to a higher-end Samsung phone or an iPhone, for example, you're not going to be getting nearly the performance with this device, but at the same time, the A13 5G comes in at a fraction of the cost. And my fifth favorite thing about the Galaxy A13 5G, and there are many more beyond that, but coming in at number 5 is the amount of storage that we're getting here with the phone. Now with this device, we're getting 64 gigabytes of internal storage, and we're also getting microSD card expansion. Now, of course, microSD card expansion is great because you can offload photos and videos to free up more of your internal storage, but having 64 gigs of internal storage is way better than having this phone potentially have just 32. You can see here, since getting the phone, I have used up 34% of the internal storage. And of the 64 gigs of internal storage, about 13 gigabytes of it goes just to the system software. So if this phone would have had 32 gigs of internal storage instead, then at this point, I would be getting relatively close to already filling up the phone. So again, 64 gigs really should be the new standard for any smartphone, and I'm glad that that's what we're getting here with the A13 5G. So those are my top 5 favorite things about the phone, and now I'm going to go over my top 5 least favorite things about the device. Now again, keep in mind, this is a relatively low-end phone compared to the rest of Samsung's lineup, so these shortcomings are probably to be expected for a phone in this price range, but I do still want you to be aware of them. Now coming in at number 1 definitely has to be the design of the front panel here. So we have a thicker bottom bezel, which I'm not a big fan of, and then we also have a water drop notch up top. Now I certainly would have preferred to have a hole punch for the front-facing camera instead of a water drop notch. It would have given the phone a much more modern look compared to what we're getting here. This design, for the most part, has been around for quite a while at this point, so it doesn't really bring anything new or exciting to the table here. It's not a total deal breaker, but again, I wish that they would have innovated a bit more with the design of the front panel. Now my second least favorite thing about this phone probably is the build materials. Now the good news is that this phone does feel decently solid and of decent quality. The bad news is that the materials that are used here are pretty boring in general. Now I am glad that the back panel here is not a glossy plastic finish, but it just looks a little bit boring in general, so nothing really exciting here. It is all made out of plastic, so I would recommend getting a case as well. Otherwise, you probably will end up scratching up the phone quite a bit. But I just feel like they could have given us a little bit of a more exciting design or finish on the back, especially when other devices like the A03s have a wavier look on the back, which I just feel like is a bit more interesting. Now my fourth least favorite thing about the A13 5G definitely has to be the display. Now there are some good things about it. First thing is, it's really not that bad. The second good thing about it is that this time around, Samsung did give it a 90 Hz refresh rate, which means when navigating around the phone, things will appear a bit smoother. But I feel like they should have given the phone a 1080p display instead of 720p, considering that they did up it at least from 60 to 90 Hz. I would rather them keep it at 60 Hz, but give us 1080p instead of 720p at 90 Hz. Just kind of seems like a strange decision there. My fourth least favorite thing about this device is that there is no ultra wide angle camera. So we do get a 50 megapixel main camera, a 2 megapixel macro camera, and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera, but unlike last year's A12, there is no ultra wide angle camera to be found with this phone. Now of course you can still take good looking pictures with the main camera, but I would have preferred that Samsung still kept the ultra wide. I feel like if you're going from a predecessor model to the next generation, you shouldn't be removing features like that are definitely not gimmicky and definitely useful. And coming in at number 5, it would have been really nice if the A13 5G did have wireless charging. I know that wireless charging is a feature that's typically found more with mid-range and upper-level smartphones, but I feel like they could have included it. It really doesn't cost that much to implement in general, and I have seen other devices, not too many though, but other devices that are in this general price range that do have wireless charging. So I feel like if this phone did have that, it would have been yet another awesome feature to have with this phone. So not having wireless charging is not a deal breaker, nor are really any of the other things in the worst things about this phone, but those are all things that I'd like to see addressed in the next generation of this phone. But if any of those things are especially important to you, then hopefully you're now aware of them. But in general, I think the A13 5G is a pretty solid budget device, giving us a lot of value especially. And I'm definitely curious to know what you think of my top 5 best and worst things about the phone. But I hope you enjoyed this video. This is the Samsung Galaxy A13 5G. My name is Kevin, and I will see you in the next one. Take care and have a great rest of your day. Bye.